They are updating the Haunted Mansion at Disneyland. This is not a drill. I repeat, they are updating the Haunted Mansion at Disneyland. We have concept art, brand new queue space, exterior queue space. They are updating existing queue space, and we've got a new gift shop coming out at the exit, a Madame Leota themed gift shop at the Haunted Mansion. We're going to take a very close look at all this concept art right now. Hope you guys are ready for this. This is very interesting. There's lots to learn from this concept art. There's lots to observe. It's more than just simple queue space being, because there's a lot of questions. The art raises questions. It solves some, raises others. Let's get first into, though, the very first statement made in the concept art, or I should say in the announcement from the Disney Parks blog. First, they state that the expansion is going to happen next year in 2024, and it's going to expand on outdoor queue space to immerse guests in enhanced theming. Very well. This is the part that caught my eye. Local legend suggests the manor known today as the Haunted Mansion was first built by a prosperous sea captain. They are noting here in this statement the original lore for the Haunted Mansion, that this place was a home occupied by Captain Gideon Gorlou, the nefarious sea pirate captain who married his bride and whom she discovered his secret. He killed her, and then she falls out the window in the attic, and her spirit haunts him for the rest of time until he finally winds up taking out his way from the Haunted Mansion. He is the ghost host. And then they go on to say that the mansion staff faithfully maintains the happy haunting grounds. And that's what the concept art is going to give us the impression that it's full of gardens and landscapes that require, because they're well kept. These are going to be well kept grounds. So somebody's doing this, right? And then they go on to say that the expanded queue will tie into these stories and more, including new gardens, that's the new space, inspired by Master Gracie, Madame Leota, and the one-eyed cat. I think I know where that one-eyed cat is going to be. We're going to get to that in a minute. But, so they're going to try to honor both stories here. Captain Gideon Gorlou as the original owner. Master Gracie, I guess, eventually took it over. But I think what's important here, at least from my perspective, is that if you're going to say that both of those stories exist, then Captain Gore can be, or Gorlou can be the ghost host. Master Gracie is just an owner of the home, but he's not the ghost host. That's the way I interpret it. Let's move on. We're going to start with this the concept art that is expanding on the Haunted Mansion queue space. So they reference gardens in the Disney Parks blog announcement. I see two gardens here, actually. The first garden, we'll start with that one in the lower right corner of the concept art. That is the existing queue space behind the wall, the exterior queue space with all the switchbacks back there where the tomb is and all the tombstones. They're mixing in a garden into that space, and then the queue will switch back and forth throughout that garden space. I would go ahead and say that this is going to occupy fewer guests. This space they're going to make this, there are going to be fewer switchbacks and wider switchbacks. Bigger, because the old ancient queue spaces were also very narrow. Go to anywhere in Fantasyland, you'll know what I'm talking about. So I feel like there's going to be fewer switchbacks here, and they're going to be a little bit wider. So you're going to get fewer guests into that space, but it's going to be more comfortable, more enjoyable. The back part of that queue is not the sexiest thing in the world. So I appreciate them trying to elaborate on that and make it beautiful, make it more enjoyable. Now, before we continue, the fact that they are having fewer guests in that space means that guests that would previously have existed in it, because that's the first place where you send more guests. As the crowds get bigger, that's the first place you go, right? So if you're displacing those guests, where are you going to put them? Well, you have to put them now, outside where Magnolia Gardens is, and that's the top half of this concept art where the tree is and the brick walls. We're going to get into that, but that necessitates them having to get a more formal queue going in that area out there, although there was already existing queue space. We're going to get that in a minute as well. But just understand now, for this point, that queue space is going to hold fewer guests than before. I should also mention at this point, it is my understanding that all of this that you're looking at here with this new Haunted Mansion queue space was necessitated so that they could comply with ADA. They had an ADA compliance issue. As you know, guests that require ADA assistance, it's very awkward. It's very difficult to get them in and out of the mansion. You have to go down the stretching room, and it's very difficult. So whatever it is that they're planning to do is going to make it, facilitate that much easier. And that's what's triggered this. I guess they felt like since they had to destroy some of the queue space in order to make this happen anyway, they might as well put some money into it and make it look nicer. Note that. So with that, let's get into the second part of the queue space that's included in this concept art, the new queue space, as it were, the newly developed queue space. I will add, while we're here, in order to give you guys some context, some reference, this curved path right here, that's the existing curved path that you take as you go around the pet cemetery. That little short brick wall right there, that's the fence. That's the wrought iron fence that separates the Haunted Mansion from Magnolia Garden and the fountain and all that. Looks like the fence is gone. And then all of that queue space that they've built here is being built in the space that is currently occupied by Magnolia Gardens, currently occupied by the fountain, and also, by the way, currently occupied by part of the Disneyland Railroad, the green pergola type deals back there, the covered queue space back there. That exists where the ADA guests get onto the Disneyland Railroad right now. It also exists where the old Fast Pass station was, a beautiful little location back there where you could get your paper Fast Passes. That's that area right here. But let's get into where this queue is happening. My assumption is that the queue is going to flow very similar to how it does now, where the first place guests go is down the path and into the garden there where the switchbacks are. But as the queue grows, they send it outside of the threshold being somewhere out of frame to the left and up a little bit. So they're going to send guests up. This is where it gets a little confusing because I'm not sure which direction they go first, but I feel like the first thing they're going to have them do is turn left right there and then turn right along the backside, the rear of that space. The queue will then turn right from there, and then you can see there's a little opening. There's a little opening there, a cutout in the brick wall. Well, actually, they can go in two directions. They can go into that cutout where the little wrought iron fence thing is and head into that courtyard, or they could send the guests left into that covered area, the green rectangular pergola. They could send guests into that section and run a few switchbacks out there, and then send them back in and then into the courtyard. I don't know which order they would do this in. Now, here's where things get a little bit interesting. You've got two means of getting guests back to the entrance of the Haunted Mansion. The first is this cutout right there, similar to the one we saw in the back. This one, a little cutout, between the brick walls with the wrought iron. I don't know what they call that, the thing. But you've also got that path that runs parallel with the perimeter of the existing Haunted Mansion space. That's where the first extended queue would go today. Those two switchbacks that run right along the fence. That's that path right there. How they're going to get guests, if they do at all, I'm not sure. Maybe they don't. Maybe they don't send guests that way. But it looks like they have allowed for that to happen. But most likely you're going to send the guests through that courtyard, out that opening there, and back into the mansion. Another observation with respect to queue space and how many guests you can get in there. As I mentioned before, they used to be able to send queue guests out in that entire Magnolia Garden space. You could fill that on the busiest seasons. Coming up in a week, you're going to see that entire Magnolia Garden filled with guests waiting to go on Haunted Mansion Holiday, the Nightmare Before Christmas overlay. That they have consumed that area, that space, but not all of it. They're only using, I believe, about half of that space. Imagine, if you will, the fountain that rests at the middle of Magnolia Gardens right now. Imagine that fountain being right about where that concrete wall is there with the fountain coming out of the wall. In my mind, I believe that's about where the fountain would be, which means they're only going to be using half of that space. So again, and plus, you've got all kinds of theming features and walls and gardens and landscaping where guests cannot be. So again, you have shrunk the available space in order to place guests That is why I believe that they have built the covered space there where in the area that used to be for the Disneyland Railroad. You're displacing guests from the main queue down here in that garden. You're displacing them out into the extended queue in the courtyard. You're displacing more of those guests because you can't fit as many as you used to in that space. You have to send them somewhere else. So I'm expecting probably 4 lines to fit. You're going to have a lot of switchbacks, unsexy switchbacks in that covered green space there. And then after that, I don't know where you send them. You send them back out into the streets of New Orleans Square, I guess. But you can't send them, you can't use the rest of Magnolia Square, or Magnolia Gardens, I'm sorry, for reasons that we're going to get into in a minute, because this is just one of the pieces of concept art that we got from Disney. There's another one that shows a whole different picture of what's happening in this space. A few things to note as far as how this thing is designed. These walls with the Gothic imagery, you know, the face that's on there, very similar to the walls that exist now where the pet cemetery is. So I'm going to guess they're going to maintain that aesthetic. You can see there's a few statues. You can't really tell what exactly they are. Statues there and another statue there. I'm guessing that they're going to repurpose the statues, the gargoyles. I think they're gargoyles, right? And there's gargoyles along the fence as well in the old Fast Pass station. They're going to repurpose some of that. It's beautiful. Those things are just going to waste back there. That beautiful theming is going to waste back there. I think they're going to repurpose that out here into this little courtyard area. There's some little, elements happening in that tree that I can't quite figure out what they're trying to represent in that tree. And then you've got a water fountain, as we mentioned before, on that concrete wall in the rear of the space that is very reminiscent of the fountain, I would imagine, that you see at Pirates of the Caribbean. So the way that I mentioned before, the little small brick wall down there where the fence used to be, you'll notice there's no fence in this concept art. They're removing that. I believe that is intentional, that they will be removing that fence, and I believe that's because they want to formally consume that space as now formally part of the Haunted Mansion. Instead of just being extra queue space that you use sometimes and sometimes you don't, and when you're not using it, it's just for regular guests, this space will now be just for Haunted Mansion queue guests. Regular guests on foot that aren't going to the Haunted Mansion will not be able to access that space. That is going to be consumed as part of the Haunted Mansion perimeter. It's important to note because that's not how things exist today. One other thing that I find very confusing about this concept art before we move on to the next piece is this section way over into the far 10th of the frame. The garden, if I'm imagining correctly, the space that they've allotted for this garden is smaller than the space that exists currently for the switchbacks that are there now. It feels compressed. And there's this building over here in the edge that looks a lot like the Haunted Mansion, except the Haunted Mansion doesn't extend into that part of that where those corners are that look like Haunted Mansion corners. You can even see some of the wrought iron theming elements there. That should be more queue space and or the tombstones and the tomb, the entry tomb for. Remember when we used to during COVID, they let guests enter that way. We've been in there once or twice. It's an alternate way to get into the queue space for Haunted Mansion. That's where that building is. Is where that. So I'm not sure what they were going for there, if it's intentional or if it means some other change. I don't think there's no way. There's no way they're appending the Haunted Mansion building. So if it is, it's just facade. It's just for show. But I would have a hard time believing that that's a real thing. But it's something definitely to keep our eyes on as we watch them develop this. Where are we going to watch this from? There's no place to watch them build this. The Mark Twain, maybe. Maybe from the Mark Twain. Yeah, let's go to the Magnolia Gardens art. And this is where things get a little bit perplexing for me. When I first looked at this, I thought, gosh, how does this art coexist with the art we just saw? Because the dimension of both this and the dimension of the other art looks bigger than what it could possibly be if you were to try to. These two pieces of art look like they're trying to exist in almost the same space. That's not a very big, Magnolia Gardens is not a very big space. But this art, for example, makes it look like it's spacious. So if we're going to believe that the concept art for Haunted Mansion and for Tiana, I'm going to call this the Tiana Palace concept art. If we're going to believe that they exist at the same time, at the same space, it's got to be kind of a 50-50 deal, right? So if we use the bandstand as an initial frame of reference, and by the way, it is reversed, okay? We'll get into that in a second. But if we say, okay, that's the bandstand as it exists now, I would say that would put, in my mind's eye, that puts the fountain that exists today somewhere about where this brick terraced seating area is. And then that wall is a common wall. It's a wall that separates Tiana's Palace from Haunted Mansion. On the other side of that wall, right there, is probably the fountain with the water, the Pirates of the Caribbean style fountain is probably on the opposite side of that wall. I'm going to hope that that's kind of what they're getting at here. I feel like the concept art is taking a little bit of a liberty with the concepts of space, and that things are going to be a little bit more compressed and narrower and smaller than they appear to be in this concept art. But let's go ahead and take that logical leap. The first thing that I noticed when I looked at this concept art, well, let's start with the bandstand. The fact that they have reversed it suggests to me that this space is now going to be consumed by Tiana's Palace, where the garden was consumed by, the other half of the garden was consumed by Haunted Mansion. This half is being consumed by Tiana's Palace. This is Tiana's Palace space. The fact that the bandstand now faces that direction, and also that you've got tables and chairs, extended seating area for Tiana's Palace guests, I'm guessing, though it's not part of the footprint, the current perimeter that exists today, that's going to change. Take a look here. The brick wall right there, I mean, that should give you a bit of reference in terms of where we are in that space. Imagine a popcorn cart right about there. Right? So if that's the popcorn cart, well, gosh, see, that's what I'm saying. It's just narrower. Okay, so tables and chairs. You'll notice also there are 5 trees visible in this concept art, which represents about the amount of trees that exist presently in that space today, which tells me, by the way, same weeping willow type. I don't know what they call these trees, but that's the word I think of when I see these. The trees are going to be kept, which is a blessing. Thank you very much. Please don't take any more trees. I'm very grateful if that remains to be the case, even though it does look brighter and sunnier in this art that actually is. Magnolia Gardens is completely covered in tree. There's very little sunlight that gets through into that space. Hopefully, I see 5 trees. I'm going to guess, and I'm going to assume that those are the trees that exist today. Crossing my fingers. In the background, you can see the Disneyland Railroad train station. There's the far background. That right there, that is the current building that is being not worked on, which, by the way, maybe this is the reason why they've been on pause. I've been told that they're waiting for permits on completing that project. But it's doubtful though, because I don't think they're touching that part of the Disneyland Railroad. So I'm going to assume they're unrelated. But that building is the building that burned, and then this building that's a little bit more in the foreground, you can see is the New Orleans Square train station. That is the existing queue space that's there. So that's going to remain untouched as best as I can tell, which tells me that if you have to, the ADA space, this is where things get confusing, and the concept art is taking liberties, and we have to make leaps of logic and sort of dissolve these two pieces of art together. The ADA entrance for the Disneyland Railroad, if we, based on what I'm seeing here, it's right about where this couple with the stroller is, in terms of where it is in frame. It's further back, behind the landscaping, but in terms of the left and right situation. Therefore, and then right behind them, where that hedge is, that's where the Haunted Mansion Fast Pass station, the old one that's going to be destroyed, obviously, that's where it would have been, which tells me that they didn't include it in this art, but that extended Haunted Mansion pergola should be in this picture, but it's not, which is curious because if you look, we'll switch back to the Haunted Mansion art, the covered area, man, maybe it doesn't. The covered area ends at the new perimeter of the Haunted Mansion Q space. So if that's the case, if we go back here, I mean, that's the wall right there. So it would be just behind that wall. So it wouldn't consume. You would still have ADA access. That's not going to be a very big space. Oh boy, how are they going to fit people in there? That queue space needs to hold a lot of guests, based on my mental math and the fact that how many guests they're going to displace, based on adding all this theming, and because you're going to be able to fit, as I mentioned, fewer guests into the queue as you could today. The Haunted Mansion queue is very dense. It's very dense in all places, everywhere you go. It's very dense. There's not a lot of, except for the outer area. Once you get behind the wall and into the switchbacks and inside the building and everything, it's very dense. You start displacing those guests, you got to put them somewhere. Okay, let's get back to Tiana's palace. As I mentioned, I believe this brick wall right here is what separates Tiana's palace from Haunted Mansion. I really love this little brick terraced seating area. You can see guests sitting there, presumably to watch the show that's happening at the bandstand. But I think it looks really good. I think it's a nice touch. It's a nice, gentle way to provide seating for guests without just putting run-of-the-mill tables and chairs out. I do like that they have a little more tables and chairs. They're expecting a lot of guests at Tiana's palace, apparently. I just wonder how long that's going to last. I just wonder. I hope it does. My fear is that, because it's very difficult to find a table often at what used to be the French Market. Very difficult to find a table sometimes. So definitely more seating was needed. This space that's being, in this concept art is being occupied by about 35 guests. I sure hope they're not expecting just 35 guests in that space. You could put 35 tables in that space. So there's a lot of empty space there where they could be putting more tables and chairs. I hope they don't. I do hope that they limit the number of tables and chairs and give it a freer, because there's just not that much space there. It looks like a lot, but there just isn't that kind of space. There just isn't. What is this? Have they created a new covered area for the way up? You can kind of see the edge right here. That looks like a handrail for the stairs. That looks like a handrail. If that's the handrail to go up the steps and onto the platform into the Disneyland Railroad queue, what is that structure next to it? Because that doesn't exist today. What is that? Is that just covered queue space for the train? I'm not sure. I'd be very interested in finding out. And I think that's about it. Let me just scan this art a little bit. I do see one thing that's worth noting. This couple right here on the seated brick area there looks like they're using a selfie stick. They're going to have to go. That does look like a selfie stick, right? Okay, let's go to the new Madame Leota themed gift shop that is going to go right next to the current exit for Haunted Mansion. It's so interesting to me, by the way, that as we look at this, the dichotomy of the theme, the mood of these two arts. They've made the art for the Tiana's Palace bright and sunny and delightful, whereas the art for the Haunted Mansion and for this gift shop is definitely more gloomy and dark. I suppose that's intentional, obviously, but it just gives a different feel, obviously, to the art. But anyway, in terms of feel and impressions, the first thing I noticed when I looked at this art, when I saw it from a distance, when the link came through, and I'm like, oh my God, what is that? I thought it looked a lot like something like a wandering oaken aesthetic, from Frozen. Mostly, of course, because of the windows and the little potted plant thing they've got out there and the stuff hanging. It doesn't look very Leota-ish from that perspective, but I digress. Obviously, this exists parallel with the exit to the Haunted Mansion, and it exists where the little kiosk, the the outdoor kiosk that held all that Nightmare Before Christmas merchandise. That was not a very big space. Certainly not big enough to hold this size structure. So clearly, the plan here is that this is going to consume part of space that is currently occupied by Splash Mountain / Tiana's Bayou Adventure. How they're going to make that work, I'm not sure. And by the way, it's kind of even though I'm excited about the idea of there being a Madame Leota themed gift shop, and I love that they're giving her love here, I feel like this is an awkward place for it. This space was not designed to have a structure on it. It was not designed to be show. This space is designed to, from my perspective at least, it's part of the transition. Disney is famous for their ability to seamlessly transition you from one land to the next. And one of the best examples of that is the transition, actually that whole back area there along the rivers of America, from Adventureland to New Orleans Square. Pirates of the Caribbean is the perfect transition between those two lands. But the transition from the Haunted Mansion to Splash Mountain was excellent. And it's because they didn't rush it. They give the time, there's a little bit of time for guests to walk and sort of, okay, it's kind of fading out and the other one is kind of fading in. Putting this giant building there makes that a little more awkward. They're rushing it with that building. So far be it for me to know, I don't know better than an actual Imagineer. I don't want to pretend like I'm an expert. It's just a concern that I have. As for the theming of the building, besides the Wandering Oaken component, I do feel like they're going for something of a Museum of the Weird aesthetic. And by the way, they mentioned the one-eyed cat. That's where I saw it before. Right there in the concept art is the one-eyed cat, I think. But that's got to be the one-eyed cat. That is, Museum of the Weird. Some of these other sort of design aesthetics that you see on the walls there, the little art or whatever, those are, to me, Museum of the Weird like-ish, if you will. You can't really, it's kind of vague and indistinct, but that's the vibe that I'm getting. The fact that they're using this sort of, it looks like you're going into a seance room. I don't know if that's simulated or not, but those are just open doors. It's not a door. It's just a thing that you walk through, and that's the red sheer veil that you pass through in order to go in there. Which I hope that's real. I hope that's what they do. That you have to kind of you have to make your way through the shroud, as it were, to enter Leota's lair. Awesome design choice. I hope it works. I hope they can pull that off. You can see that there's the entrance looks like it's going to be just as you leave the exit. And by that I mean the proper entrance. You can see the shingle hanging from the building there right as you exit, so you'll make a quick left. But there are two other ways in over here, or exits. But that looks to be what they're going for there. I'm curious what they're going to do with the merchandise here. This is going to be obviously Haunted Mansion themed merchandise, and very much likely Nightmare Before Christmas as well. Does that change the merchandise that's in Port Royale Curios? I asked that question because that is known. That's basically the Haunted Mansion / Nightmare gift shop, right? But it is so far detached from the Haunted Mansion that it feels kind of strange, like it doesn't belong. So it does make more thematic sense to have a Haunted Mansion gift shop right as you exit the traditional for a Disneyland attraction. So if that's the case, which clearly, obviously, they're going to put Haunted Mansion Nightmare merch in that shop, do they change? Does that change what merchandise you can put in Port Royale? Do you need two Haunted Mansion gift shops, or can they go a different direction? Is that enough space, for example, for Pirates? It would make more sense for Port Royale Curios to be more Pirates merchandise, perhaps, because that Pieces of 8 is kind of small. But is there enough merchandise to support both of those locations? I don't know. So what would you guys think would be the type of merch that you would expect to find in what used to be Port Royale Curios? Would you change? Well, no, you wouldn't change the name of it, but you would change the merch. By the way, not Princess of the Frog either, because they've already got a whole gift shop for that too. We've got a whole gift shop at Eudora's Boutique. What else is there? There's Pirates, Haunted Mansion, Princess and the Frog. Interesting situation that they've created. It's just another gift shop. Unless, what if you expanded the Royal Street Veranda? What if you expanded the Royal Street Veranda into the Port Royal Curio space? You either, oh boy, I don't know, that's tough, man. That's a lot of money, and that's something that Disney does not have a lot of right now. I'm surprised they're even doing this. This is a big budget deal. In order to make it look like they're proposing in this concept art, and some of the things that they are proposing here, that's a fairly good sized budget. And something that, by the way, is not really going to add to the bottom line at all. I don't think this is an income producing move. Which begs the question, as I mentioned earlier, everything is, the trigger for this was the ADA compliance issue. If it was just that, they could have accomplished that, I think, certainly with much less effort, a simpler, elegant, small solution. They could have just rerouted guests in some way, the ADA assistance guests. They could have done this for less. So why do they choose to do this? I don't know. That's an interesting question, but actually does sort of cover everything. We're already through that. Wow, that was fast. This is supposed to happen in 2024. I would guess they may start this. They could start this as soon as the holiday season is over. I wonder how long. Oy, oy, oy. All that, we've got Tiana's Bayou Adventure still going. Thankfully, Tiana's Palace will be open before they start this. But you're going to have this happening right next to Tiana's Bayou Adventure. I don't think it's going to force them to close anything, though. I will say that. I think they can find a way to do all these things without having to close Haunted Mansion, so that's good. I'm expecting for things to start happening in February. If they want to have this thing done in 2024, this is going to be 6-9 months, maybe even almost a full year to do all this. I think my guess is 6 to 9 months. That's my guess. One thing I'm positive on is we're going to cover it. I have found another new reason to be on the Mark Twain once a week, and I couldn't be happier about that. I do love doing recon from the Mark Twain. So stay tuned to Fresh Baked to catch all of that. I can't wait to start showing this. It never fails, man. You just know there's going to be something to be keeping an eye on every single week. That's why we do the Disneyland construction updates every single week. So stay tuned for those. I hope you guys watch. Subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. If this is your first visit to a Fresh Baked video because you saw the news about Tiana's or about the Haunted Mansion and the new queue, and you said, hey, there's a video about some guy going into detail about what's happening with that concept art, welcome to Fresh Baked. Glad to have you here. We've been around. We've been friends for 12 years, 13 years. We want to be your friend too. So subscribe to our channel and follow us on Instagram at _FreshBaked. And on Twitter at FreshBakedDisney, that's Fresh with no E, and on TikTok at FreshBakedDisney. And if you like our show and want to show your support, please do consider joining our Patreon campaign at patreon.com/FreshBaked. We just put up a bunch of videos, home vlogs and things like that on the Patreon account. And there's still 2 more videos coming up that we're working on as far as our trip to the San Diego Zoo. So enjoy that if you can. And then that's it. Be safe out there, everybody. Be kind to one another. Fresh Baked.